I don't want no oil a-spoiling my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to those of you listening on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMar, and you are tuned into For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about the environment and ecology, and we talk about it from the point of view of how it's going to affect you, your family, your pocketbook, and we talk about it from an upbeat, a positive point of view, because we really believe that there is a green future, that we are going to move towards a sustainable society, and that once we do, we will all be better off in terms of our health, in terms of our wealth, and in terms of our happiness. And on that optimistic note, we have a great show for you today. We're going to have a guest on. She's going to call in at 8:15 if all goes according to plan. Her name's Sarah Taylor. She's with a group called Windustrious Cleveland, and they are putting up a huge offshore wind farm in Lake Erie, and she's going to talk to us about that. Of course, now those of you who are regular listeners to this station and you're here for the sports, don't worry. Promptly at 9, Mick Gonzalez will be back with the cheap seats, and we'll be going right back into sports. But for the next hour or so, we're going to be talking about the world, the planet, the Earth, and our place in it, and what the planet is doing. And it's going to be a good show, as I said, and we have an update on HB6 coming up. And as driving in today, I had a little experience that I drove on that roundabout, that brand new roundabout at the corner of Bern and Detroit. And it worked great. I didn't have to stop the way I usually did. Somehow that stoplight at Bern and Detroit would always stop. You'd be like the only car coming. It would be green right up to you get to it, and then it would turn red right as you arrived. And somehow that was a really annoying stoplight, and now it's gone. Now we have a roundabout. And roundabouts are sort of one of those new things that when they first started going in around here in Northwest Ohio, everybody complained about them. And I know I was one of them. I was like, I really don't like having to do this. But now that they're in place, now that the change has been made, we can actually see that it's better, that it actually is more convenient to be able to just scoot around instead of always having to stop. And living in a sustainable society is a lot like that, too. Things will change. Things will be different from they are now, but they will actually be better. They'll be more convenient. They'll be cleaner. They'll be cheaper for us. For example, wind and solar right now are cheaper than gas, are cheaper, of course, than nuclear, which is the most expensive. They're even cheaper than coal. And so our electric bills, if we were wind and solar powered, would be lower because the costs are lower. And that's just one example out of thousands. And let's go back a little bit. This show is a call-in show. And I like to say this is the best show in Ohio, but it gets better every time you call in. And the number to call in is 866-240-1037, That's 866-240-1065. And I have a feeling that we're going to get some calls today because, once again, we're going to be talking a little bit about this HB6 law. And I have noticed an incredible surge of trolls about the HB6 laws on the social media, on Twitter, on Facebook. It seems like if you post something against HB6, suddenly 10 trolls descend upon you, and they're all saying the same things. They're all reading off the same script. And one of the things about these social trolls, the internet trolls, is that there might actually only be one person with 10 usernames, but it's really kind of shutting down political debate. And political debate is essential in a democracy. We have to be talking about these issues. We as citizens have a responsibility for helping to make these decisions. And this decision, House Bill 6, is a huge decision. It's going to be affecting the way our society powers itself for years and years to come. And so what I would like to read for you right now, last week I went and actually testified again on House Bill 6, and I had this beautiful, wonderful, eloquent testimony, and they kept saying, oh, we're running out of time. Everybody's got to cut their testimony back, and so I had to edit this. But since I have a radio show, I get to read the whole thing, and I'm really looking forward to it. So here is the testimony that I read before the Senate Energy Committee. This is the third time I have stood before the Ohio State Legislature testifying in opposition to House Bill 6. At the first hearing in front of the House Energy Generation Subcommittee, dozens spoke in opposition. Since then, hundreds have protested this bill all over Ohio, and thousands have learned how awful it is, and now the economic and environmental future of millions hangs in the balance. First Energy has given this body a deadline. They have dictated the timeline for this decision, saying that you must decide by the end of this month. But the urgency in this situation is theirs, not yours. As the old joke goes, your incompetence does not represent an emergency on my part. And the amount of incompetence on display here by First Energy is staggering. First Energy was applying to the NRC for renewal of its license for Davis-Besse. Those of us who oppose nuclear power held a people's hearing in Toledo. And in that event, we laid out for First Energy that they would make more money by closing their nukes and switching to wind and solar power. They ignored us, went all in on nuclear, and went bankrupt. Now they are coming to you, begging for yet another bailout, billions in ratepayer charges on top of the billions in bailouts they've already received. But there are much more fundamental questions here than whether or not we should bail out one corrupt, incompetent company that enjoys a state-enforced monopoly on electricity. The true question before this body is, how are we going to power our society? This is a very deep question and should not be rushed into. Corporations should not be dictating to the people through this body what kind of an energy policy our society should have. Corporations are amoral. They have no soul, no conscience, no values, beyond sucking as much money out of the economy as possible to give to their shareholders. There is a reason the government exists. There is a reason we elect legislators to make decisions and don't simply allow boards of directors and CEOs to run our society. It's because you have the ability to look beyond the money First Energy is offering and look at the deeper questions. The deep moral question here is, do we have the right to generate radioactive wastes that will kill, maim, and cause disease for our descendants for hundreds of thousands of years, just so that we can have a moment of electricity? The answer is no, especially since there are perfectly practical alternatives that are clean, efficient, and more economical than nuclear power. I have attached the testimony I gave before the House Energy Generation Subcommittee. In it, I document the success of Germany's policy of shutting down its nukes and coal generation and replacing them with wind and solar. I won't repeat all that testimony, but to summarize, Germany has the most stable grid and the strongest economy in Europe. It has gone from an energy importer, when it was dependent on nukes and coal, to an energy exporter, now that it has substantial wind and solar power. All over the world, wind power is the fastest growing form of energy because it is inexpensive, practical, and can be deployed quickly with a utility-scale turbine going up in less than a month. Wind and solar are the sources of energy that can bring us to a clean energy future, and Germany is leading the way. Ohio is running away. All of the above is not an energy policy. It is a lack of an energy policy. It is declaring an inability to choose between what is good and what is bad. It is an excuse to make bad decisions. Deciding to go with nuclear power is the worst possible decision economically because it's the most expensive form of energy. And it is an evil decision. In poll after poll, Ohioans of all economic and political backgrounds have asked for increases of truly clean, renewable energy, wind and solar power. Instead, you are being asked to force nuclear and coal power on them. To reference the New Testament, the people of Ohio have asked for eggs, and you are considering giving them serpents. During the debate on this bill before the full House, Representative Seitz defended the setback law the Ohio State Legislature passed in 2014, which effectively stopped wind farm development in Ohio. He told an emotional story of an imaginary little girl killed by a wind turbine a mile away that threw off a blade. The thing is, that little girl was imaginary. Nuclear power has killed real children. One of the reasons Europeans are closing their plants is that studies show that within 4 or 5 miles of a nuclear plant, leukemia rates double, thyroid cancer rates double, and miscarriages double. The young and the unborn are the most susceptible to nuclear radiation because their cells are rapidly dividing. How can this body, which just passed one of the most restrictive abortion laws in the country, while wailing about protecting the unborn child, then a few weeks later turn around and choose to sacrifice those same unborn children upon the altar of nuclear energy by choosing an energy source that generates radioactive pollution that specifically targets them? Those increases in cancer near a nuclear plant come from the relatively small routine releases of gases that nuclear plants generate during normal operations. But those releases are microscopic compared to the tons of nuclear wastes being generated and stored at nuclear plants. Some of the wastes that nuclear power generates stay deadly for hundreds of thousands of years. There are over 200 different kinds of radioactive atoms being generated in every nuclear plant every moment that they operate. These atoms act like suicide bombers in the body, getting absorbed, incorporated with regular atoms in our cells, and then exploding, causing the damage that causes death, cancer, and other diseases, and as well as mutations. You do not have the right to subject all our descendants to this man-made scourge for the next 10,000 generations. Nuclear power was created based on the lie that we would one day be able to solve the problem of the waste it creates. What we have learned over the last 50 years is that there is no way to truly isolate any part of the earth from another, that we are all connected to everything else on this planet through countless cycles of energy, water, carbon, and air. We are in this moment literally breathing in atoms that were in the breath of lions and eagles a few months ago. That is how thoroughly everything on Earth is mixed together. To throw radioactive atoms into that mix is immoral. Radiation is antithetical to life. Something else we have learned is just how fragile that life is and how lucky we are to be protected from the radiation that fills most of the universe. You are being asked to take our fragile, protected place in the universe and fill it with deadly radiation. In exchange, you are being offered money, power, and influence. This is that moral decision that you've always been told you would have to make someday. We know how the amoral corporation First Energy wants you to vote. They have spent millions trumpeting their point of view over every kind of media that there is. But the truth doesn't need to be shouted at you over and over. The truth speaks for itself, and the truth is that this bill is evil, and you are put here to protect future generations, not sacrifice them for your own short-term gain. Do your job as a legislator, not as an employee of First Energy. Choose an energy future for Ohio that is clean, sustainable, and benefits all Ohioans, those that pay electric bills today and those yet to be born. Take time to make this decision. Travel to Germany and other places of the world where wind and sun are creating a truly green future. Find out for yourself how practical it is. Don't let First Energy shove this evil policy on the people of Ohio. Vote no on HB 6. So that was the testimony I read, and let's hope it has some effect. The update on HB 6 is that they're going to vote on it this coming Tuesday. And so all this effort, all these calls to your senator, there's one more chance. We can call them Monday and we can call them Tuesday morning, and then the vote's going to happen. And I don't know how it's going to work out. I'm 90% sure the committee is going to allow this to go forward, but I don't know about the full Senate. A few senators have said they're going to vote no. And based on, there's been a ton of pressure from the public on this because nobody wants to bail out First Energy again. And so that's it for HB 6. Now, as I said in my testimony there are alternatives to nuclear power. There are practical alternatives that we have the technology to do today. And one of the most important alternatives is wind power. And I am very happy to have as my guest Ms. Sarah Taylor. Hi, Sarah, you're with us, I hear.
I am. You heard my wonderful, warm feeling after listening to your testimony. It's so strong and so eloquent. So Thank you.
Well, thank you
very much.
Thank you, Sarah. I mean, I guess the measure of the eloquence will be how many senators it actually convinced. So we'll find that out. But Sarah, you're a member of an organization called Windustrious over there in Cleveland, and you're working on a big kind of radical wind farm development inside of Lake Erie called the Icebreaker Wind Project. Could you tell us what's the scope of the Icebreaker Wind Project? How many turbines? How big a project we're talking?
Well, maybe I could just clarify that I actually initiated this Windustrious project. Windustrious Cleveland is something I thought about, it came out of the blue to me, literally. And so I did initiate it in 2006. And then the actual official project was after the creation by the Cleveland Foundation and others of the Great Lakes Energy Development Task Force and studies that were done. They formed the official project, and that was in 2009. So that has been going ahead since then. Very exciting. So, sorry, what was the question again?
So the question is that the project, which is, as I understand it, finally on the cusp of moving forward here, just what is the scope? How many turbines are we talking about at this point? How much energy would they produce?
Well, at this point, 6 turbines about 8 miles offshore from Cleveland are the project goals. And each turbine, would be about 300 feet tall, and it would produce enough electricity to generate more than 20 megawatts. So that would be, enough to power 20,000 toasters.
Wow. Wait,
so,
each turbine is 20 megawatts, or the combined of all 8 would be 20 megawatts?
Combined would be 20 megawatts. Each would be about 3.5 megawatts.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that is kind of amazing because, I remember when the biggest turbine you could get would be maybe 650 kilowatts, and now we're talking, 3.5 megawatts.
Yes. And there are even, in places off in the North Sea in Europe, there are, really twice as big turbines being installed offshore, where the winds are even stronger than, on our Lake Erie. But our Lake Erie is a wonderful place to start. It's much more shallow and flat than the other lakes, so it's a great place to start. And but hopefully in the future the other lakes will contribute as well. It would be wonderful to have all this fresh water used, and you can think of the water smiling up at this use of their clean power resource they have for us.
Mm-hmm. And Lake Erie is kind of geographically geared for this, isn't it, because of the direction that it runs. Since Lake Erie sort of laid out southwest to northeast, and that's generally the direction of the prevailing winds, it's sort of a perfectly situated lake for wind power.
Well, I hadn't thought of that. I mean, whatever way the wind is coming from, the turbine can have its blades swivel to respond to that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So it'll be great wherever they are.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was a little bit involved in the Buffalo has some wind turbines, not offshore. It's kind of in the borderline. It's on their turbines are on the breakwalls right at the edge of the lake, and that was one of the points that came up as those turbines were being planned, is that Lake Erie is perfectly situated wind-wise. So well, this is great. This is a project which is actually bringing us towards the green future that we always like to talk about on our show. But because our show is concerned with ecology and environment, I have to ask you the birds and bats question. What is there a threat from these turbines to birds and bats?
Well, it's totally a contrived worry. Wind turbines kill a minuscule number of birds and bats. Birds, as the Danes found 30 years ago, the Danes in Europe, they did radar analysis, very detailed. They could detect moths, and they eventually found one moth had been killed. But I mean, wow. They showed, and also the U.S. Forestry Division over here, they also found from their studies that big buildings, windows especially are the confusion for birds. They kill over half the birds and bats. 55% they kill of birds and bats. Then the cats, domestic cats, kill 10%, I think it is. So if you go down, you eventually find wind turbines, 0.01% are killed by wind turbines. They are so fast and smart, birds and bats, they can navigate their way easily through, around, between wind turbines, and that's what the Danes found with their studies, and it's obviously easy to see they're much faster than modern wind turbines, and they have no problem navigating through them, even in the North Sea, where there's a great lot of the wind going up the North Sea, and so a lot of migration there, much more even, I think, than in our westward part of Ohio, although that has a migratory route too, just like the North Sea, but they found that that's not a hazard for those migratory birds any more than the ones that live there all the time. They are able to see and navigate around and through and weave in between, so that is not a hazard. And so those percentages have been found many times, that this is a contrived worry, but very effective. It's been going on by these created environmental organizations that are really run by the fossil fuel industry and the nuclear industry, and especially based in Ontario, and they're really working over here in Ohio as well. They don't want to see wind and solar develop as an alternative to nuclear, which is very strong in Ontario, and as well as in Ohio, but even stronger in Ontario, and the fossil fuel industry very strong in parts of Ohio, and we must just see the future where our workers who have been involved in those industries can navigate into the future, which is, jobs making components and wind turbines for the future. That's what, and solar parts, and that's what we need.
Yeah.
Long answer.
And I can back that answer up because I once spent a day on the Tug Hill Plateau in New York. They've got a wind farm there, and I literally spent a day just watching the wind turbines to see how the birds would interact with them.
Oh, really?
Yes, I did, and it was a nice day. I had a picnic lunch and literally just sat there and watched the turbines for an entire day. And one kind of amazing thing I saw was that crows were literally flying in and out of the blades as the turbines were turning. And
lovely.
Yeah, they were literally playing with these wind turbines. They didn't look at them as something dangerous as far as I could tell. But and aren't there's some strategies that wind farms follow that can even lessen the impact even more? Isn't that correct?
I've been interested. I haven't looked into. I often wonder whether they could have tiny little lights at the tips of their blades for nighttime, or whether that's maybe something that would attract them more. I don't know. Or little flags on the tips. I imagine there are people studying that seriously, just because of the opposition, not because it's really necessary. But yes.
Yeah, there's I know that there's talk of ultrasound being used to scare the bats away. Basically, putting some ultrasound generators inside the blade, since it's hollow, and that
I see.
might be effective in warning the bats off. And I also know that they turn off the turbines during high migration points, during the peak of the migration season. They'll literally just shut them down and let the birds go by. That's based on the wind farm. I heard that from the person who runs the wind farm up in Van Wert County in northwest Ohio. So, okay. So let me ask you, you had this idea, this vision back in 2006. What prompted it? What sparked you to create Windustrious?
I think it was that I thought, it just occurred to me, as I said, out of the blue, really, that Lake Erie could provide us with the sort of leadership in using wind to produce electricity. And the fact that wind is stronger and steadier, it's lovely to have it onshore as well, and rather lovely and if you walk under a modern wind turbine, you won't even hear it. So all these fears are contrived by the opposition, and about noise and all the rest of it. And I just thought that because the wind is stronger and steadier, just a few miles out on the lake, and at that point, actually, there were no freshwater installations anywhere in the world. Then one did, after a couple of years, get built in Sweden, and I had the production person in charge of that and the CEO of the Swedish company come over and talk with us here in, or shortly after that, which was lovely to interact with them and have the public interact with them. But then it just, it moved from there, and in fact we've now got one offshore from Block Island, Rhode Island. That's on the east coast of the U.S. Still none in our freshwater lakes, of course. That's where we could initiate, and it would be lovely. We could illustrate to the rest of the Great Lakes region what could become, and our industry that we have. It's lovely to be proud of our industry that started Cleveland and northwest Ohio, with steel making and so on. But our industry could also, mature by being the initiator of this, and it would certainly stimulate a lot of manufacturing and job growth. So to be at the head of this, leading the effort.
So where are we in the process, Sarah? How close are these turbines to being built?
Well, hopefully it'll be built in, it'll actually be starting to produce electricity maybe in 2022. So that would be great to have that future. And sorry, what was the other part of that question?
Basically, it was the same question. Where are we in the process?
Well, the DOE, the U.S. DOE, the Department of Energy, has okayed this project and, in fact, given it a couple of big grants and to start the process there. So that is encouraging. But as you so eloquently pointed out, in at the state level, we are seeing such worrying developments with HB 6, House Bill 6, and so we don't know if they're going to slow down the effort, the opposition, by demanding extra studies, and those are always such financial burdens to a project that the developer has a hard time dealing with these demanded unnecessary extra studies that don't have to be done, geological and burden that and all the rest of it, which is already completely understood and dealt with and has they have no bad effects on these issues.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what might be a real hold-up, but hopefully it'll be 2022 when these initial ones go up.
All right. And I guess if anyone has a question for Sarah, you can call in at 866-240-1065 in the next couple minutes here. And I actually just sort of have one general question for you. You've been working on this for quite some time. How has the wind industry changed and evolved since you started working in this area?
Well, it's really exploded in importance around the world. I mean, it's expanded exponentially. It's been going up 20% a year, and there was hopefully we will. I mean, we just seem to be behind the curve so much more than anywhere else in the world, really. I mean, our neighboring states, Indiana and Pennsylvania, they're doing much more exciting things than we are now with installing wind installations, and so and doing this sort of investment in the future. So it's we should be at least up to that level, if not leading the way. So hopefully HB6 won't pass the Senate.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, we're doing everything we can to tell the people of Ohio about how terrible it is, and get them to call their senators and oppose it. I don't know how the vote's going to go, but
no.
But as you say, there is a chance it can be stopped in the Senate. That the Senate has stopped it before, but First Energy has been pouring obscene amounts of money into the political process.
Yes.
And so this is really kind of a democracy versus money conflict here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because 70% of Ohioans, even despite all the deceptive advertising, at this point in the latest poll, 70% oppose House Bill 6. So we'll really see if the Ohio State Legislature is willing to reflect the will of the people of Ohio, or if they're willing to just do First Energy's bidding because they've got the most money. Well,
yes. I would just say that if anybody, like you mentioned earlier, if it's coming up in the Senate a couple of days, and if people could contact their state senator before then, and ask them to oppose House Bill 6, that would be very, very useful. Mm-hmm. And so as soon as they can do that, if possible, great. And if they want to actually come to my website, which is less important at this point, but the Windustrious.org, and that's the word industrious with a W in front of it, Windustrious.org, and they can, sign up that they think it would be great to have offshore wind. It's great to have onshore as well, of course, but offshore, if they want to sign up as a Windustrious champion, saying it's a great idea, or just give their names positively feeling about it, I'd love to add them to the website.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Sarah. This has been a real pleasure, and I'm glad we were able to work out all the we had a few technical difficulties getting hooked up here, but I'm glad that they all worked out, and thank you for being a guest on the show.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, that was Sarah Taylor from Windustrious.org. Well, thanks for listening, and we are now at the bottom of the hour, and so this is when we go to our wonderful sponsors, the ones who make this show possible. This is a commercial show, and so we need to have sponsors and businesses supporting us and that we advertise here on the show. And if you are a business that would like to advertise on this show, you can simply contact me at joedemar4agreenfuture.org. That's JOEDEMAREFOR agreenfuture.org. But our first sponsor that we're going to hear from today is the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programs that teach people to love and respect nature. They restore wildlife habitats, and they lead outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects 20 parks and nature preserves around Wood County, which are open from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. One of the things that they do is they have a monthly eco-lit book group, which is people read an ecology or a natural-based book, and they get together and they talk about it. And coming up, that's a monthly event. But coming up this week, we have Cycle Work Basics. That's going to happen Wednesday, June 26th, from 6 p.m. to 7:45 p.m. at the Cycle Works and Bicycle and Fitness Store at 248 South Main Street in Bowling Green. And bicycles are one of the great things, one of the ways you could use the Wood County Parks. And bike upkeep is crucial to ensuring that your rides are smooth and safe. And the experts from CycleWorks will tune up your bicycle skills and maintenance and teach you maintenance fundamentals in this hands-on workshop. So when you want to register for any programs or get any more information on what Wood County Parks is doing, you go to their website, which is www.wcparks.org. That's wcparks.org. So the CycleWorks Basics is Wednesday. Then on June 27th and 28th, there's going to be a coastal kayaking skills rescue and safety program. It also runs June 30th. So on June 27th, 28th, it's going to be 6 to 9 p.m. And then on June 30th, it's going to be 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. And that's going to happen at Three Meadows Pond, which is at 700 Three Meadows Drive in Perrysburg. And there you can join the American Canoe Association instructors and advance your kayak safety and rescue skills in an open water coastal environment. Kayakers from novice to intermediate are encouraged to participate in this 3-session course. There's an online description for the full details and registration requirements. You have to actually register by today, Sunday, June 23rd. This costs $75, although if you're a member of the Friends of the Wood County Parks, it only costs you $65. And to register for the program, again, you go to wcparks.org. And volunteer opportunities at the parks, you go to wcparks.galaxydigital.com. And there you can register for things like cleaning up invasive species or helping in the greenhouse where they grow native plants. But we're very grateful to have the Wood County Park District as a sponsor. Our other sponsor for this hour that we're very happy to have is DeMar Consulting. DeMar Consulting is a computer consulting business that will come to your home. They help you with all your home computing needs. And if you have a problem like a computer not talking to a printer, or if you have a computer that needs to be backed up, or a computer that needs to be restored, they will come out and they'll teach you how to do it. They'll teach you how to use your software. If you're somebody who just wants email and, wants to be able to get that to work, they can help you. Or if you're someone with a more complex problem, everyone who works at DeMar Consulting has a degree in computer science, so you know that they know what they're talking about. And the ways to get a hold of DeMar Consulting is on the web at demarconsulting.com. That's DEMARE, then the word consulting.com. Or you can call or text them at 419-973-3000. That's DeMar Consulting for all your computing needs. And so those are our sponsors that we're very grateful to have. And so now we'd also be very grateful if you decided to call in and talk about any environmental topic, any ecological thing that's going on. And maybe you have some thoughts about what Sarah was just saying about this wind farm that's going up in off the shore of Cleveland, 8 miles out on the lake. That's really interesting. If you want to call in, it's 866-240-1065, and we'd be very happy to take your call. So now it's time where we talk a little bit about some of the environmental news that's been happening in this past week. And I think we've already pretty thoroughly covered HB6, so we're just going to go and talk about some of the other headlines from ecology and environment this past week. So one of the biggest headlines, of course, is that the permafrost in the northern part of the Earth, of the globe, in places like Alaska and Canada, the permafrost, which is that layer of frozen ground which always stays frozen all the way through the summer, that permafrost is melting much, much faster than anticipated. It's melting. In fact, the scientists didn't expect the Canadian and the Alaskan permafrost to seriously start melting until about 2090, and unfortunately it's happening right now. And melting the permafrost has a whole bunch of different ecological and environmental effects. One thing is that all that water that was bound up in that ice comes up to the surface, and what would have been a dry plain, or a relatively dry plain that could have forest or tundra on it, suddenly becomes this water-filled surface with these shallow ponds and some of them are circular, some of them are oddly shaped, and it completely changes the environment, and it disrupts the migratory patterns of animals like caribou, which there might have been a plain there that they could walk across and graze on, and instead it's this series of puddles that are, and the ground becomes all uneven because as the permafrost melts, it does not melt in a nice even manner. It's very lumpy, and the permafrost melting actually, because ice expands, ice is takes up much more room than water. The ground sinks, so the ground can sink up to like 3 or 4 feet, and it does that very unevenly. So what was a nice clear plain becomes this jumbled terrain. And of course, we've talked before about how melting the permafrost, the trees that are adapted to grow on top of permafrost, they end up just falling over. And that's the tiaga. Those are those evergreens that grow in the northern part of the planet, and are actually, it turns out, more important to giving oxygen into the environment and absorbing carbon dioxide than the rainforests, because there's so much more of them. And so to basically topple all these forests by melting the permafrost under them can have really terrible effects. And in the stories I read about the permafrost melting, I finally have seen scientists admitting and saying something that I've been saying literally for 20 years, and that is that we are caught in a positive feedback loop. That as long as we keep adding carbon to the environment, the effect of adding carbon is the release of more carbon. So the effect of adding carbon warms the Earth, and then the warming of that Earth in turn releases more carbon. For example, with the permafrost, there's tens of thousands of years of dead plant material inside that permafrost. And once the permafrost melts, that will all be eaten by bacteria, and that will release carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere. And methane is 8 times more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, and so that will also speed the warming and in turn release more carbon. And that we're on our way to reaching the maximum. What happens if you have a positive feedback loop, like if someone were to call in right now at 866-240-1065 and if you held your phone microphone right up to the radio speaker, that would create a positive feedback loop, because the radio would amplify the sounds in your phone, and then that would go through the cycle and get amplified again, and it just keeps accelerating until you get this screech, because all the systems just go right to their maximum output. And that's what's happening with carbon in our environment right now. So very serious, but in my opinion, in my belief, that the way positive feedback loops work is that if you stop the input, if you stop putting more carbon in the air, then if you cover the microphone on your phone, then the positive feedback loop stops, and you basically get level out at whatever level you're actually at. So once we stop putting carbon in the air, I don't think these fantastically accelerated things like the permafrost melting will keep happening. But it's going to take a lot of effort to make that happen, and we see a lot of that effort actually happening in Europe right now, where there are massive protests just on global warming. Thousands and thousands of mostly young people pouring into the streets in places like London, where they shut London down in order to protest carbon dioxide, in order to protest the carbon economy. They say it's a matter of survival. And I was in a protest here in the U.S. back in 2014. 400,000 people in New York City protesting global warming, protesting our dependence on oil and natural gas. And our protest in New York City, it was organized in part by Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate for governor for president in 2016. Oh, and I should mention I'm the political director for the Ohio Green Party, although on this show I don't speak for the Green Party. I speak only for myself, and the same with all my guests, and the same with you if you call in at 866-240-1065. So our protest was very nice. We stayed within the parade routes, and we had our signs, and we got some coverage. And for me, it was really just an awe-inspiring experience to be in a crowd of 400,000 people who were all marching for the same purpose. It was really energizing. But the protests in Europe are not quite so nice. They're not quite so well behaved. In fact, right now, there's a direct action over in Germany. A bunch of protesters actually have taken over a coal mine. They charged a police line, and they're occupying this coal mine and basically saying, no more coal. Now, this is what happens if the response from the government to a crisis, to a problem, is not rapid enough or is insufficient. People start taking things into their own hands. And the reason we have a democracy, the reason we have a way for people to have a direct input into their government is so that we can have a more effective government, that the government can be more responsive to big problems like global warming, problems that individually we can't do much about, but as a society we can stop. We could just stop using carbon. The technology is there. And instead of that, what's happening with the U.S., instead of all these effective things that are literally changing the way the European economy runs, instead of facing the problem, the Republicans that control the federal government completely, and well, except for the House, and that control the most of the states, they're literally running away from this problem. They were refusing to face it. In fact, that's happening in Oregon right now, where all the Oregon members of the state legislature literally fled the state in order to avoid voting on a global warming, on a carbon cap and trade program. Now, cap and trade is not perfect. It's got some problems. It's not a terribly effective solution, but it is a solution Oregon has decided to try, except for this tiny minority of, and I'm going to call them cowardly, because if you run away from a problem, that makes you a coward. So these cowardly Republicans have fled the state in order to prevent even this limited response from happening in the state of Oregon. And it's just an example. In the U.S., we used to embrace change. We used to take pride in the fact that we were on the cutting edge, that we're willing to try new stuff, that we're willing to throw out old systems if the new systems are better. And somehow that has been lost. Somehow the forces that be want us to stay with the power of the past. I mean, that's what House Bill 6 does, is it takes us back to the 1950s when Ohio was powered by coal and nuclear power. And it's kind of terribly disappointing. It's kind of a shame. But I know that it's not going to be a permanent situation, because every week I get a letter from my great-great-granddaughter who's living in the year 2299. And I like to share it with you guys and for you folks. And so here is this week's letter from the future. Dear great-great-grandpa, hello from the future. Things are going great here in the year 2299. Michael and I are back together, and it's as if we never left. As you know, we are on the Kola Peninsula, and this far north this time of the year, the sun doesn't set until midnight, and then it rises again at 3 a.m. It seems like everyone goes a little crazy with so much sunlight around. In the nearest town, Zapoliarny, they had a big party that went until dawn. They even sent a special dirigible run out to our base so that those of us working on the project could come to Zapoliarny and party with them. As I was riding back at 4 a.m., Michael had sort of passed out / fallen asleep. I was thinking about how there were almost no dirigibles at your time. Instead, you used cars and planes to go everywhere. That seems weird to me. Dirigibles that use hydrogen can carry tons of weight. They don't need roads, and our dirigibles are covered with solar cells, so they don't even need fuel. I watched the old video of the Hindenburg blowing up, but hydrogen isn't nearly as dangerous as the gasoline and jet fuel you used in your time. Our dirigibles are engineered so that they can't blow up like the Hindenburg. And they don't need roads. They're fast, they're safe, they're clean. I guess it must be like how the people at your time looked back at the Middle Ages and wondered how people could have big cities without any sewer systems. Well, I'm writing this on the dirigible ride home, and we're flying over an old, overgrown, abandoned cement road. There are old road ruins like this all over the earth, and whenever I see them, I think about you living in that time. Hang in there, great-grandpa. Things will get better. Love, Marie I. So that's it. That was our letter from Marie. It was a nice letter. She's very dependable, my great-great-granddaughter. So here we are. We've got about 5 minutes left in the show, and if you'd like to call in at 866-240-1065 and share your thoughts about anything we were talking about, that would be, we've just got time to take one call. So I guess the big headlines, the one that was trying to push everything else off the headlines this past week was, of course, the situation with Iran. And I was around for the Iraq War, for the start of the Iraq War. And it turned out, of course, after we invaded, that the basis, the foundation for that war was a lie, that Saddam Hussein did not have weapons of mass destruction, that there was no need to invade that country and essentially disrupt that entire society, which still hasn't recovered. And I think that the truth is an essential part of environmentalism, of ecology, because these things that we're doing to the environment really do have an effect. And, you could make predictions about the future based on your understanding of science and ecology. And we did. 20 years ago, 40 years ago even, environmentalists and ecologists were saying, if we keep putting carbon in the air, if we stay dependent on nukes and coal and oil and gas, we are going to change the planet. And the lie, the falsehood at the time was, the Earth is too big, this won't happen. And of course now we ran the experiment. We went ahead and added all the carbon, and now we're seeing exactly the effects that were predicted. They're actually happening faster than predicted because the scientists back then didn't want to be accused of scaring people, of being doomsayers. But this is a year here in Ohio where farmers were unable to plant. And that's exactly the sort of weather that was predicted 20 years ago, 40 years ago. And in the Iraq War, what those of us who opposed the Iraq War predicted, and I was one of those. As a member of the Green Party, we believe in nonviolence, so we always believe there's a different way to settle problems besides war. What we predicted was that this was not a war about preventing weapons of mass destruction from being deployed, that this was a war over oil. And of course, that's exactly what it turned out to be. The big oil companies are in Iraq right now. They're pumping out Iraq's oil, and they're selling it around the world and burning it, putting it into the air. And as a result of that, the climate is collapsing. This is a situation which must change, and we have to change it. And we have to make that change both at the local level. You can do things in your own homes like avoiding plastic bags, planting a garden, keeping your heat down, insulating your house, putting up solar panels. These are things you could do individually, but we also must make the changes as a society. There's no running away from it. It doesn't matter how far those Republicans in Oregon run. They can run to Antarctica, and they will still see the effects of global warming. They could run up into Alaska, and they can still see the permafrost melting. There's nowhere to hide from global warming. It doesn't matter how much money you've got. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat or a Green or a Libertarian, or if you don't believe in political parties. This is a threat to all of us, and it's a threat we must all respond to. And I'm confident that we both can respond to it. We heard from Sarah Taylor today about one response that's happening in Cleveland. The technology is there. We can respond to it. And I believe that we will respond to it. Because ultimately, we are humans and we're tough and we're adaptable, and we have a brain that can predict things that are going to happen, and we can act on those predictions. And that's a uniquely human attribute, and I think we're going to apply it here, despite all the millions of dollars that are being spent to push us the other way by companies like First Energy. Well, we're coming to the end of the show here, and I just wanted to say thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure talking with you today. This is actually one of the greatest pleasures of my week, is talking to you folks. So more information, email me at joe@joedemar4agreenfuture.org. And I'm getting tours together. I'll talk about it more next time. Tours of the wind turbines and solar panels at Bowling Green. So if you want to see these things, this change for yourself, email me at joe@joedemar4agreenfuture, and we'll get you inside one of those wind turbines. All right, that's it for this week. This is Joe DeMar signing off.